On this Friday night, Canada Post workers walk off the job. The nationwide strike as the Crown Corporation faces dire financial straits.
At a certain point, enough is enough.
What it means for delivery disruptions with the holidays around the corner. A former Canadian soldier detained by the Taliban. The dangerous work he was doing in Afghanistan and what we know so far about his status. Plus, anger in Georgia, the controversial deal with Russia prompting protesters to storm a parliament building. And a priceless portrait's homecoming.
This is for the world to see, and I'm just beyond proud.
It's returned to Ottawa after a brazen heist took it across the globe.
Global National, reporting tonight, Neetu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Millions of Canadians are being warned to prepare for a difficult and stressful holiday shopping season. Tens of thousands of workers are on a nationwide strike at the country's biggest domestic shipper, Canada Post. At 12:01 a.m. Eastern, some 55,000 postal workers walked off the job after their union and the Crown Corporation failed to reach a deal. Mail and parcel deliveries across the country have come to a grinding halt, with some post offices even closing altogether. Canada Post says it is a critical time for the Postal Service, which has posted billions in losses over the past few years. More of that in a moment, but we begin tonight with Mike Armstrong and what the work stoppage could mean for you.
It was lots of noise, but no work at Montreal's main Canada Post sorting station. The union gave a 72-hour strike notice earlier in the week and wasn't bluffing.
Well, we couldn't bluff with what they were offering. At a certain point, enough is enough.
In a statement, Canada Post says as long as workers are out, mail and parcel deliveries won't be happening, and even when the strike ends, service will take time to return to normal.
Very happy.
Among the main issues are working conditions and pensions, but wages are a major roadblock as well. The union is asking for a raise of 22% over 4 years. Canada Post is offering basically half of that. Right now, the two sides aren't close.
It is a big gap because you're offering 11% in 4 years. What are we supposed to do with that?
Union leaders say the offer doesn't nearly cover the cost of living increases in recent years. Now, timing has a lot to do with this work stoppage. The union's walking out at the start of the corporation's busiest period with Black Friday and the holiday season when it can have the biggest impact. And coming on the heels of lockouts at Canada's two biggest ports, businesses are already hurting.
We're not at the bargaining table. We don't have a say in the matter. We can't fix anything, yet we're the ones left holding the bag and incurring all the costs.
Canada Post says its offers go as far as it can. It's bleeding money and market share. Canada Post says business is down about 20% this year, and just in the first half of 2024, it's lost $490 million.
I'm not looking at any other solution other than negotiation.
The federal labor minister, who earlier this week forced dock workers back on the job, says he won't interfere with Canada Post for now. He's asking the two sides to keep talking, but he's not mincing his words, calling the negotiations to this point extremely difficult. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Canada Post has recorded significant annual losses since 2018. And Gaviola joins us now. And just how bad is the financial situation at Canada Post and why?
Neetu, it doesn't look good. In fact, the chair of Canada Post's board this summer said the model isn't sustainable. Now, on the mail front, we know volumes have collapsed. We went from 5.5 billion pieces of mail going through the system in 2000 down to 2 billion this year. That's declining at a rate of between 6 to 10% every year. And then you have the parcel service. So we know parcel demand has picked up as people and businesses have embraced e-commerce. But Canada Post has lost 50% market share in the last 4 years to private companies. So that's not the silver bullet. And on the financial front this spring, the Crown Corporation posted a loss of $748 million for 2023. And there are lots of signs that losses will continue and will deepen. Now, one thing to consider when it comes to this strike, which disproportionately harms small businesses and people in rural communities, now, as they scramble to find alternatives, there's a real danger that they're going to stick with those private carriers long after the labor disruption stops. Neetu?
Anne Gaviola in Toronto. Thanks, Anne. The Canadian dollar continued its decline today, closing at just above 71 cents U.S., its lowest level in more than 4.5 years. Analysts point to a growing gap between the strength of Canada's economy and that of the U.S. And the recent re-election of Donald Trump hasn't helped either. Heidi Petracek looks at the winners and losers of a lower loonie.
On New Year's Day on Bonita Beach.
Jim David and his wife head to Florida almost every year for the winter, always keeping an eye on the exchange rate beforehand.
My wife watches the financial quotes every night on the news, and if she sees some movement and she sees a good deal, we'll buy our American dollars and jock them away.
They've bought half the cash they need, unsure when to purchase the rest. After starting out the year over 75 cents to the American dollar, the loonie has had ups and downs. It was already trending downward by the time the U.S. election came around. Then it took a post-Trump tumble.
Since the election in the States, the trend has been down for the Canadian dollar as for the euro in Europe, and because there's just a lot of worry about international trade.
Canada may be America's next-door neighbor, but there's a distance between the two economies right now. The unemployment rate in the U.S. is lower than Canada's, and its interest rates are higher, luring investors.
For example, a 2-year government bond right now, you make over 1% more in the United States than in Canada for the exact same 10-year bond.
I have another bond. It all adds up and could result in Canadians paying more for some imported goods like fruits and vegetables. And cross-border travelers won't see their dollars go as far. But Canadian exporters, on the other hand, could stand to gain. Selling commodities like lumber and oil for American cash can be a boost. But now there's a wild card, President-elect Donald Trump.
America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, richer.
Just how big his tariff increases are going to be, how much he wants to rewrite the Canada-U.S. free trade agreement, that's all something we don't know.
Who knows? I mean, really, who knows?
Markets, they say, hate uncertainty, and right now, there is plenty. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
We are learning tonight about a Canadian believed to have been detained in Afghanistan this week. The country under Taliban rule is one of the most dangerous in the world. The Canadian government is urging people to avoid all travel there due to the volatile security situation. There is also the potential for arbitrary arrest and detention. Jeff Semple joins us now. Jeff, this case involves someone with a history there?
Neithu, sources say Canadian veteran Dave Lavery arrived in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan this past Monday. It was Remembrance Day. He'd planned to attend a ceremony at the British Embassy there, but he was intercepted at the airport in Kabul, driven away, and he hasn't been seen or heard from since. It's believed he's being detained. There's been no official word yet from the Taliban. Global Affairs Canada confirms it is aware of an incident involving a Canadian in Afghanistan, and Lavery is no stranger to that country. The retired Sergeant Major served for more than 2 decades with the Canadian Armed Forces, including tours in Afghanistan. And after the Taliban lost control of the country, Lavery launched his own private consulting company in Afghanistan. Now, when the Taliban clawed back control of Afghanistan in August 2021, Canadian embassy staff had already fled the country. There were no Canadian soldiers there. Lavery was the only Canadian on the ground at the Kabul airport trying to rescue former military interpreters and other Afghans who had supported Canada's mission in that country to get them onto evacuation flights. Those efforts earned him the nickname Canadian Dave. And Lavery had continued that work in the years since, working with veterans groups, including the Veterans Transition Network, to get vulnerable Afghans out of the country.
A lot of deep emotions.
I spoke with Lavery about that work on many occasions, and we also met Lavery in Ukraine after Russia's full-scale invasion, where he was doing the same thing, trying to rescue people out of the war-torn country. Now, sources say Lavery was doing that work in Afghanistan with the knowledge and support from Canadian veterans groups and the Canadian government, which is now working to secure his release while dealing and negotiating with the Taliban, a group the Canadian government considers a terrorist organization. Neithu?
All right, Jeff Semple in Toronto. Thanks, Jeff. The FBI has released a new photo of Ryan Wedding, the former Canadian Olympic snowboarder suspected of running a transnational drug trafficking ring. This is the 43-year-old at an unknown location believed to be taken sometime this year. It's starkly different from the previously released image of Wedding with long hair and a full beard. American investigators are offering a $50,000 reward for any information leading to his arrest. Wedding is also accused of multiple murders in Ontario. It's believed he may be hiding out in Mexico. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is wrapping up the first 2 days of the Apec summit in Peru, where leaders from Pacific nations, including China's President Xi Jinping, have been meeting. The discussions are taking place against the backdrop of a looming second term for Donald Trump and growing concerns over tariffs. China sees Trump's protectionist stance as an opportunity to expand its influence in the region. As David Aiken reports from Lima, Canada is trying to find middle ground.
For Peru, the relationship with China is everything. As Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived for the annual Apec summit, he opened a new port in the Peruvian capital, paid for by China. It's yet another example of China extending its influence in the world, while Trump focuses on America first. Canada's relationship with China is more modest, as Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly conceded after her meeting with her Chinese counterpart.
The goal when it comes to our relationship to China is that, of course, we'll always defend Canada's interests, but we need to have a predictable relationship. And that's my job.
The other job for Joly and the Canadians here, answering questions from other world leaders about Trump.
If there's a country in the world that understands the U.S., it's Canada.
And that, Joly says, has made Canada even more relevant at a global forum like this.
I think that Canada's influence is actually increasing because of the impacts that the world is now facing with the new administration.
How are you? Good to see you. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spent the day meeting other APEC leaders, including Indonesia's president.
Indonesia and Canada has had very good relations, I think, for many, many decades.
And the relationship took a step forward with a new Canada-Indonesia trade deal.
Indonesia is the fourth largest country in the world by population. It's the most important economy in Southeast Asia.
In a speech to a group of business leaders here, Justin Trudeau boasted that Canada was third in the world when it came to new foreign direct investment last year.
Canada's been facing a massive boom of investment from around the world of companies that want to come into Canada.
The message that Canada is trying to send here is that yes, there may be some turbulence, some chaos even when Trump takes over, but so far as business and investment is concerned, Canada can be a safe haven. Nitu.
All right, David Aiken in Lima, Peru. Thanks, David. The Bank of Canada's interest rate cuts and a surge of fall listings appear to have given the housing market a boost. The number of homes sold last month rose by 7.7% over September, making it the busiest month since April of 2022. The Toronto and Vancouver regions both saw double-digit increases in sales activity. Prices, however, saw a downward trend. They're about 2.7% lower than this time last year. Ahead, why protesters stormed Parliament in a breakaway region of Georgia. In Georgia, protesters stormed Parliament in a Russian-backed breakaway region, demanding the resignation of its leader and the cancellation of a controversial new investment agreement with Moscow. Demonstrators used a truck to smash through the metal gates surrounding the Parliament building before smashing windows to get inside. Critics fear the agreement would open the door for Russian citizens to purchase property in the affluent Black Sea region, potentially pricing out local residents. In the Middle East, Israel is intensifying its bombardment in Lebanon. An airstrike flattened a large residential building in a busy Beirut suburb. A large fireball erupted before the building collapsed. The blast came after Israel issued an evacuation warning for several buildings in the area. Details on the impact and casualties have not been confirmed. Today, Israel also struck an emergency response center in eastern Lebanon, killing more than 20 rescue workers. And during a visit to Beirut today, an advisor to Iran's supreme leader said Tehran would back any decision made by Lebanon for a lasting ceasefire, signaling the Islamic Republic is seeking a solution to end the conflict on that front, which has dealt heavy blows to Hezbollah. It follows reports the U.S. ambassador to Lebanon presented a draft ceasefire proposal to Lebanon's parliament. Conference controversy ahead, the call to overhaul the structure of UN climate summits. A super typhoon has pummeled parts of the Philippines, swamping rural communities and displacing thousands of people in the country's north. Drone footage released today shows the devastation, destroyed bridges, widespread flooding, and farmland littered with debris. The Philippines has been battered by 5 major storms in less than a month, and there's no room for reprieve. Now a new storm is brewing in the Pacific with the potential to intensify into a powerful typhoon and make landfall in the country's capital region on Sunday. The UN Climate Conference in Azerbaijan is facing growing criticism. A group of veteran political leaders and scientists say the current structure of COP is unable to drive the urgent and large-scale changes needed to ensure a safe and livable climate. They also argue places like Azerbaijan should not host such summits, with concerns host countries are using these events to greenwash human rights abuses. Redmond Shannon reports.
Opening the United Nations Climate Conference this week, this is how Azerbaijan's president described his country's oil and gas reserves.
It's a gift of the God.
A gift from God. That address following a BBC report claiming an Azeri official tried to use his role at the summit to discuss a fossil fuel deal.
We have a lot of gas fields.
After Dubai last year, this is the second conference in a row hosted by an economy dominated by fossil fuels. For many experienced participants and analysts, this is the final straw. In an open letter to the UN Friday, a group of veteran climate leaders and scientists demanded an overhaul. Among the other requests, the letter asked that hosts be committed to green energy, that summits be smaller and more frequent, and that the influence of fossil fuel lobbyists be reduced. Those lobbyists, the target of this pointed protest at the conference Friday.
The fossil fuel industry, they are one of the most powerful industries in the world.
Earth scientist Dr. Carlos Nobre is among those who signed the letter.
The people there at COP29, they start seeing that we are moving towards an ecocide for the planet if we don't really find much more effective solutions.
Many of those in Azerbaijan admit changes are needed, but for now, Canadian activist Catherine Abreu says there is no alternative.
As imperfect as this process might be, it is the process that we have to make our best step forward in tackling those problems.
A major issue that hampers progress at these summits is the need for almost 200 nations to agree on every word. However, it seems that come next year's conference, there may be one nation fewer signed up to the Paris Accord process. The United States. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Next, the much anticipated homecoming of a prized Canadian portrait. A Canadian treasure is finally back where it belongs. A prized portrait of Winston Churchill is now hanging once again on the walls of Ottawa's Chateau Laurier, nearly 3 years after it was stolen. The photo of the former British Prime Minister is one of the world's most famous portraits. Eric Sorensen reports on its long journey home.
Voila! Winston Churchill. And the portrait known as the Roaring Lion is home in the historic Chateau Laurier Hotel.
The fact that it's here, the goosebumps were back.
Stolen art is seldom recovered. The most relieved person, Bruno Lair, an engineer at the hotel who reported it missing and became a police suspect.
Originally, I was a suspect. Now I'm not a suspect. I rehung the picture personally.
And when he first heard it was found,
I think I could have cried. Sat down and cried.
The photograph is one of the most famous in the world.
He was welcomed there by a Canadian Guard of Honor.
The British Prime Minister gave a speech in Ottawa during the Second World War.
If anybody likes to play rough, we can play rough too.
Right after, he prepared to have his picture taken by renowned photographer Yusuf Karsh. Churchill lit a cigar. Karsh took it from him, and the image was captured of a defiant wartime leader.
It was a scowl, yes. It was a determination. What it inspires, what it represents, and it's back.
How it came back is a remarkable story. Someone took it from the public lounge in the hotel 3 years ago. It was eventually sold at a Sotheby's auction in England to an unsuspecting Italian collector. Ottawa police eventually tracked it down, and the new owner gladly gave it back.
If Mr. Karsh donated it to the hotel, it means that it really wanted it to stay there.
A Powassan, Ontario man charged with forgery and theft is to appear in court in the new year. A whodunit still to be told. But the happy ending is all but complete. Protected now with plexiglass and an alarm, police had the photo reframed, just as Karsh had it mounted decades ago.
We felt like we had gone back in time and got a peek into this moment in history.
A Chateau employee received a touching note from Karsh's widow, Estrelita, who lived with him in the Chateau Laurier for many years with that famous picture.
I am delighted my husband's portrait of Sir Winston Churchill is back in the home where it belongs.
Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
That is Global National for this Friday. I'm Neetu Garcha. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great night.